Well, thank you all for joining us today. I'm Robin Anderson. I'm the Director of Programs and Communications at the Canadian Agricultural Safety Association. This is our first forum of 2026, and we're so excited that you could join us today talking about safeguarding Canada through farms through FireSmart. Ken Cox is a wildfire prevention officer with the Department of Natural Resources. And this presentation, we're really excited. It's going to be talking about fire management on farms and what that means for producers and for those of us who support producers. If you have questions, please put it in the chat and we will have Ken answer those questions at the conclusion of his presentation. The presentation will be about half an hour, and then we'll open the floor up. And feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat if you like, where you're from and why you're interested in this presentation. We'd love to hear from you. And we'd also love to hear from you if you have any ideas of other forms you'd like to hear from CASA. Please let us know. We'd be happy to pursue those. And yeah, so without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Ken so he can introduce himself further and share his presentation. So thank you. Welcome to everyone. And Ken, I'll let you take the floor. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you for the invite. I mean, this is it's always good to talk about FireSmart. I know it's January of 2026, so we're not really too worried about fire right now, but I see there's a lot of folks here. I've seen one participant from, I think it was Georgia. A lot of Canadians. I know fire's on everyone's mind for sure, considering the last couple of years we've been having. So on the FireSmart program, uh, uh, US wise, same kind of program. It's called FireWise. Pretty consistent as far as the measures for FireSmart and what folks can do are pretty consistent. Nothing much changes depending on where you are. So yeah, a little bit about myself. I am the wildfire prevention officer in Nova Scotia, a little island on the east coast of Canada. I spent 22 years out in Alberta with wildfire management, so fairly familiar with bigger farm setups, large tracts of lands, ranches, large producers and that. And also, Alberta is very active on wildfire, so I have had a fair bit of, we'll say, opportunity and abilities to see a lot of wildfires, see what it can do, the effects and the uses we'll call potentially for fire. So I will let's hope this works. I'll share my screen here and we can start. So, Robin, it's all good. You guys can see the FireSmart presentation now?
No, Ken, just you'll want to share at the bottom there. I bet you that's what the
How about
problem
that?
is. There you go. I think yeah, perfect. Great.
Okay. Okay, so so FireSmart farm and agriculture preparedness. I mean, we could be talking about FireSmart for a long, long time if we get too deep into the, we'll say, weeds for the program and what FireSmart can do for producers and hobby farms, any kind of location that potentially might be impacted by FireSmart. So FireSmart Canada, it's been around since 1993. It was originally developed in Alberta, a very prone province to wildfire. It is a national program now. It helps residents increase neighborhood resilience in wildfire to minimize negative impacts. FireSmart, it can be very broad and work in any situation, but FireSmart originally was developed as a residential kind of use around people's houses and what they can do to mitigate fire impact. Each province and territory in Canada have adopted this National FireSmart program. It's currently being ran by an organization called CIFC, so the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Center. They're out of Winnipeg, and again, they're kind of the administrative overseers of the program, but each province has a bit of a spin to their FireSmart program depending on fire, what type of forest they have, boreal forest or some kind of an Acadian forest. But yeah, it's a very well established and adopted program. And like I say, each province and territory within Canada has their own version of it. So this is a snapshot of the FireSmart Canada FireSmart.ca is the website to go to, and each province and territory, just go on the map, you can click on the location you're at, and each province and territory will have a liaison. So if there's any more questions kind of related to that province or territory, there'll be a contact information for that. So now you can contact them directly for any specific FireSmart stuff related to the province that you are in. Some provinces like BC, Alberta, most of the Western provinces, they do probably have multiple, if not agencies, multiple people that deal with FireSmart. So some of the other provinces that aren't necessarily fire prone so much will only have one, just like Nova Scotia, Maritime provinces. Yeah, a good resource in FireSmart.ca to go gather information about the program. There's a bunch of initiatives that FireSmart does do that could potentially be helping out if anyone's interested. So FireSmart was built on basically 7 disciplines. Education, of course, education is the always number one for what we see for any kind of, any kind of program that deals with, we'll say, natural disasters, emergencies. Education is probably the most important part. I won't go through too much of these just for time, but legislation, each province and territory, they do alter, change, develop legislation to kind of work within mitigation measures to help folks deal with it. Municipalities and counties do a lot of work within FireSmart, and they do alter legislation, bylaws. Vegetation management is definitely one of the bigger ones. You can take vegetation management as a garden in front of your house that you might want to remove the mulch out of, trees close to houses, or all the way up to large vegetation management programs where you're fire smarting or altering large swaths of standing timber to reduce fuel load and fire hazard. Emergency preparedness, that kind of goes along with a lot of any other natural disasters that can occur. The more we are prepared and the more that we work on, say, tabletop exercises and make sure that all the agencies are in tune on what's happening. If it does happen, the ability for those organizations to work within it quickly, preparation and working together is something that we really need to do more of. Cross training, we do a lot of training with fire departments, other government agencies, and again, this is more of a purpose just so we get education out, make sure that people are aware of what they can and cannot do, what they should do. Fire departments, local government agencies that deal with wildfire, they do work together quite closely. So the closer we're trained and the more we're used to the gear that we do use is definitely a bonus. Interagency cooperation. Within Canada, like I mentioned about CIFC, they're the leads for FireSmart. Where I'm at in Eastern Canada, we're a member of the Northeast Compact, which is Maritime provinces, Quebec, and the eastern states. We share resources, training, and information back and forth in that respect through Northeast Compact. And again, West Side, same thing. There's a Northwest Compact with Western provinces and Northwestern states. Development and planning, this is more of a municipal thing, I guess we'll say, or the provinces don't really get too involved with developing or planning, but if in the planning stages, if there's communities being built, or even we'll say, land being cleared, there should be bylaws and things put in place so that folks are aware of what they can and cannot develop, and develop in a fire prone lens, we'll say, so that you're not basically putting a subdivision or something into a pure conifer stand that is now a fire hazard. So planning for that and having that in your development processes within the municipality is definitely a bonus. It's something that we do try to do with FireSmart, is get municipalities involved with developing bylaws. So British Columbia, they're definitely the lead, we'll say, in FireSmart. All the municipalities, I believe, in BC are very involved with it. They've developed a farm and ranch assessment for FireSmart, and it's a fairly comprehensive document. You can go through all of your structures that you have on site. The fields are included, and they look at critical infrastructure that's within the farm. But basically, kind of what I said about FireSmart, where it was based on a residential kind of setting. Any building that you have on a farm site would be, these numbers as far as the immediate 1.5 meters up to 6 feet away from any building there should be completely free of any combustible materials. That's including decks, that's including your roof, your gutters, your eaves trough, all that stuff. As you expand out from the building, we get into the intermediate 1.5 to 10 meter. And it's not necessarily neat if it's non-combustible, that's even better. But reducing any combustible materials within that is definitely a bonus to just expand that defensible space that you're looking to get. Again, no need to remove everything, but pruning, thinning, mowing, raking, just keeping things less or low on fire fuel is definitely part of the program. Some big farms out there, 30 meters away from any building is definitely doable, I think. And then if you look at that, again, all we're doing is we're expanding away from a structure that is critical to you in the operations or in a home to expand the ability for fire to not get close to it. Again, you're using the same techniques. If you have the ability through a woodlot or any other purpose to convert, we'll say standing conifer, which is the most flammable, to a hardwood stand, that's a it's an option. It's not a very quick thing to do. Trees don't grow that fast, but mowing if possible, removing dead and down, get rid of any conifer content if possible. So I think this would be pretty. There might be a few things in here that may not have been heard of before, but again, creating the defensible spaces is the main purpose of it. A lot of farms, like I said, I was out west for a lot of my career, and we did get a lot of calls on fires on farms due to equipment being caught on fire. If it's folks that working in the fields, ATVs, all that stuff. It is definitely something to consider for farm sites, is maintaining your equipment, making sure that they're clean, properly maintained, spark arresters, mufflers aren't dragging through the grass, all that good stuff. Again, protecting your buildings, taking care of the individual buildings, like multiple, like you could have 15, 20 outbuildings on your farm. Excuse me, each one could potentially be looked at in that FireSmart realm of the immediate, intermediate, and extended zone. We'll get into a little bit more here, but the biggest threat for any structure that is national, international, is ember transport. So fire can potentially, depending on the intensity of it, travel up to 2 kilometers. And just because you have large swaths of open land does not mean that fire will not impact any structures that are on that, because embers will land in it, and potentially within ember traps, anything close to the buildings would now be causing it to catch on fire. Non-combustible materials is preferred. Things do get expensive as we start to get into metal cladding, all this kind of other stuff that is considered to be fire resistant. But if that's not an option, just expanding that area of defensible space around the buildings is acceptable. It's not 100% guaranteed, but the more opportunity you get to keep fire away from the building, the more chance of it to survive. Screening and closing any holes that will allow embers to get into the building is another option. Rather inexpensive, as long as you're using a metal mesh or something that is not flammable itself. Water, there should be, if there's ponds on site on your farm or anywhere close by, consider those to be usable. Any water sources available is a bonus for any kind of wildfire close by. Sprinklers are something that we definitely do promote residentially and on farm sites. Is if if you guys do have the sprinklers available on site, if emergency services do come in, they would potentially use yours, or if they're already pre-set up, it's good to have. It's just as the fire expands and moves, the resources of emergency services does get kind of limited. So having those tools on site is definitely a good thing. A fire plan or any kind of evacuation or emergency plan that you would have. I guess one thing to consider is if there's an active wildfire, smoke is a concern. If emergency services, emergency people are coming into a large site that has multiple outbuildings on it, you know, visibility could be limited. They're able to get around, but they're not too sure where things are. So having something that they could see as a visual as to where things are, if it's fuel sites, fertilizer, those kind of things that could potentially be a risk to them and cause the fire to get worse is a good thing to have. Again, evacuation muster points, all these things are good to have on site. Hopefully no one has to use them, but if they're there and people know how to use them, they're definitely a good plan to have. Again, livestock, some larger sites, a lot of livestock, trying to move them is not an option. I'm sure there's some sites that could potentially be used to hold on site, just areas that don't have long grass in them, areas where if they are fenced in to keep them in one place, it's not wooden, so the fence will burn down and you got livestock running around everywhere. But there's options besides trying to move them. Some have probably done it, if not seen it, where using combines and things like that to harrow up fields, and now it's no longer able to transport fire through it. Good places to either put livestock, equipment, things that are valuable that you'd want to definitely save instead of leaving them as is. Put them in a field that has now been kind of pre-prepped to remove hazard. Insurances, we've seen a lot of this in especially other countries and even up here in Canada about, are sites protected from wildfire? It's definitely a very specific thing for certain areas for insurances, but just something to consider. There's definitely a lot of valuable assets on a farm site that, if insurance doesn't cover, it can be pretty damaging. And every province, territory, state, I think they would probably have a very robust, we'll say, monitoring system for wildfires so that folks are being kept in the loop on what's happening and conditions as the hazard builds. So just be aware of that. Things that you can check provincially and nationally to ensure that you're aware as the weather changes, wind events, those kind of things, lightning storms. Just so you're aware that don't get caught off guard by something that has been kind of pre-seen by meteorologists, we'll say. So, what FireSmart practices can do to protect structures and property? Again, we've talked about reducing fuel load. That's one of the biggest things that we can do. And conifer, evergreen, green, non-leafy needle trees are the most flammable that we have in our standing forests. Removing, thinning, getting that stuff kind of separated from any kind of structures is a good practice. So there's a video here later, but the last point there, so 80 to 90% of structures lost during a wildfire are due to ember transport, and that's been proven in many case studies for wildfires, especially in Western Canada, where there's a reason, folks, if they hear about fires that have happened in communities, why did this house burn and not this house? There's a lot of information that's being shown that the houses that were mainly impacted were because there were certain things that were close to the structure that now caused fire to be immediately close to them, and that would of course catch things on fire a lot quicker. So that's where FireSmart kind of looks at is structures themselves. We don't need to do large swaths of vegetation management to make fire less of an issue. The structures themselves, there's a bunch of stuff that can be done on a minimal expense and minimal time to allow that structure to now be less impacted by wildfire. Just a little graphic in here. Percentages wise, again, there's been a bunch of case studies done. Um, you know, 4% if you have wood shake, wood siding, that kind of flammable material, the chance of the structure surviving is definitely very low. But as you go through, shingles are considered a Class A fire rated, asphalt shingles. Metal is probably preferable. Asphalts are good. Those kind of structures, if you do have that type of material on them, the chance of them catching on fire just exponentially go up. And then if you include the materials the structure is built out of, plus vegetation thinned within that 10-meter area, the chances exponentially go up percentage wise. I'm sure folks have probably heard of wildland urban interface. This is getting very, very common in a lot of places. Eastern Canada, for one, scale wise, Eastern Canada is small provinces, a lot of infrastructure, a lot of private land, so we're spread out, and there's definitely lots of development happening all over North America. As far as a definition, human development intermixed and intermingled with wildland fuels. That's the definition of it. I mean, everyone likes to get close into the woods because it's very, very nice to live in it, but it does come with its issues and hazards. And now you take into consideration that wildland fuel plus constructed fuel. A lot of houses these days are built out of press boards, a lot of glues, a lot of plastics, very, very flammable and very, very hot. Of course, toxic materials also. So, it's one of these things where these interfaces are definitely expanding, and they definitely do cause a lot of issues with communities. So that's kind of what I was speaking about as far as Canada. If we look at the urban interface maps, the one on the right side of the screen is strictly for wildland urban interface, the kind of pinkish color. You look at Eastern Canada, there's definitely a lot more proximity to wildland fuels and urban interface. You look at the map that's on the left-hand side of the screen there, this is more of a mixture of urban interface, infrastructure for industry and commercial. So that, we can say that a good third of the populated areas in Canada are considered to be urban interface. So the ability for fire to impact people's livelihoods and houses is a concern for sure. I won't go through much of this one, but I guess just a couple of big key takeaways from those case studies that I mentioned before about British Columbia. They've done a lot of these. And again, the biggest thing is the first point, fire enters neighborhoods almost exclusively via embers. They're, like I said, there's been instances where some fires have spewed out, we'll say, embers that are still viable after 12, 15 kilometers. So they can travel a very, very long way. The presence of flammable material within 10 meters of any structures is one of the bigger significant factors. Any yards that do contain, again, conifer species, cedars, junipers, spruce, pine, fir, that was problematic. Fire always entered homes due to flammable materials being close to the structure. We think of, gardens with woody stemmed stuff close to a building. Flame always travels upward once it gets into the eaves of a building, up into the attic or into the structure. The chance for significant damage is exponential. Recommendations, these are basically FireSmart kind of standards. We'll say remove, reduce, relocate any combustible materials that you have close to it. One thing that in most wildfires, the evacuation will probably be called at some point, so there's a very good chance that structures and people's houses will be vacated, so they'll be basically left to their own, we'll say, vices. So any chance that that stuff can be removed close to the houses prior to the chance of survivability just goes up. Again, that 5 foot, 6 foot range around the house is the most critical of having nothing combustible by any building, not including just houses, but any structure that's out there with a 6 foot. Now, next to a foundation, if there's a gravel pad out to 3 or 4 feet, and then no combustible material as far as trees, long grasses, fences, if that stuff is all removed, the chance is very, very good that that structure surviving the impact of the wildfire. I won't go through much of that. We kind of already covered most of that stuff that's as far as a recommendation goes. But I did want to end this off by just showing a video that BC put together on specifically what can be done on a farm site or a ranch. So plug this here. Hopefully it's not going to be too loud for you.
Wildfire mitigation is an essential part of your farm or ranch wildfire plan. Taking action before the threat of a wildfire can help reduce asset loss and increase the safety of those living and working on your property. It will also help emergency responders by making it easier and safer to protect your operation. In this video, we will explain how wildfires can move from the surrounding forest onto your land. We will also identify simple actions you can take to mitigate this risk. According to the FireSmart methodology, risk from wildfires originates from 3 different forms of ignition: embers, radiant heat, and direct flame. Embers. Embers have been known to travel 5 to 6 kilometers and can ignite fine fuels such as grass, branches, needles, and wood adjacent to buildings. These are called ember traps. This is the primary way fires spread from forest to and through farms and ranches. Radiant heat. Radiant heat can ignite combustible and flammable materials if a fire gets close enough, within 10 meters of those materials, and burns hot enough and for long enough. Direct flame. Direct flames from a fire can ignite combustible materials in its path, and then continue burning through your farm from fuel source to fuel source. Both radiant heat and direct flame require fuel pathways to travel through a farm. Every operation and circumstance is unique. By understanding how each of these 3 forms of ignition work, you can identify where fires might start on your farm and how they might spread through your farm. You will then be able to begin the work of reducing risk from wildfires to your operations by removing pathways and opportunities for ignition. Now we will explore real examples of how these forms of ignition might occur and what some mitigation solutions might be. We will start with the primary source of ignition: embers. Reducing risk from ember ignition means removing ember traps.
These fence panels are a perfect ember trap. Embers will get in there and can sit there and smolder for hours at times and ignite and burn your entire building down. The issues in this area are fairly easy to fix. The vegetation can be removed. The holes in the side of the wall that lead right into the straw can be patched and covered over. It's important to make sure that we eliminate these ember traps because those embers can smolder for hours, not a full day, and you may lose your structure well after the fire front has passed through. An area like this is high risk for ignition from ember transplant. You have lumber, sawdust on the ground, dead grass. In some situations, you'd be able to clear this down to a non-combustible surface, like with on concrete or gravel or dirt. In other situations, that would be too much work. So you can minimize that chance of ignition by separating it from the outside area with covering it with tarps, poly plastic, draping it over the piles or right across the opening on the front of the building. While it's not always practical or even possible to enclose the areas that we have our feed and hay stored in, what we need to do is mitigate against the risk of that fire spreading from that area outside into our priority zones. So if at all possible, we want to keep these dry feed storage areas away from our other priority structures. Another consideration would be dividing your pile so that if one's lost, the other may be safe.
Often on farms, collections of different materials can accumulate whether they are being stored for later or waiting to be removed from the property. These present great risks to the farm as ember traps.
You see in here the collection of dried vegetation, which is going to grow back annually. It's the perfect ember trap. The ember is going to come rolling in here and absolutely ignite this highly flammable material. We're going to move into the other larger, coarser materials, and we're going to have a serious fire.
Accumulation of combustible materials, waste piles, dry vegetation, and other fine fuels are inevitable on a farm or ranch, and sometimes difficult to avoid. As part of your annual fire mitigation strategy, identify priority areas on your operation and start by reducing ember traps in those areas. This might include clearing vegetation and dry material accumulation before fire season, and moving combustible materials to safer locations. It can also mean closing in areas from embers, perhaps by skirting crawl spaces with metal siding, closing in eaves with 3mm mesh, or hanging plastic over large openings as temporary measure. Now we will explore ways to mitigate the risk of fire from radiant heat and direct flame.
So fire follows the fuel. Combustible materials and elements can actually act as pathways leading the fire back to our priority structures. What we need to do is eliminate those pathways, remove them, and create a defensible space of 10 meters around our priority structure.
Radiant heat.
Fire spread from radiant heat takes place because a fire is burning intensely enough, long enough, and close enough to spread the fire directly to another fuel source. For example, if we had fire in this stand of mature conifer, we could easily see the fire spread to this structure without there ever being direct flame contact. The cinder block building is an excellent example of a structure that is impervious to radiant heat. Other examples of exterior building material that can withstand radiant heat would include metal siding, forms of stucco siding. The very popular cement fiber board or hardy plank is also an example.
Direct flames.
We see here a perfect example of a potential pathway fire could take. We see the long grass growing in the wooden fence leading directly to the barn. While it isn't practical to assume we're going to eliminate all of our risk from wildfire, it's important that we focus on the areas of importance around our primary structures. Taking the fence back 10 meters and replacing it with a non-combustible material, and eliminating the ground fuels specifically within that 1.5 non-combustible zone would be absolutely critical for this structure. Wherever possible, creating a 1.5 meter non-combustible surface around all of our priority structures is absolutely essential. What it will do is it will eliminate the path of fire to our structure, as well as eliminate the capacity for embers to ignite when landing in that zone. For example, this heavy rock, this heavy gravel is an excellent choice. You can see that some of the grass clippings from last season are in here. It would just be a very gentle raking that would eliminate that debris buildup, and that would basically be required annually just before fire season.
In many cases, you will find opportunities for multiple forms of ignition together in one place.
A very common situation on many rural properties is having multiple outbuildings fairly close together. A situation like this where you have two buildings this far apart, there's still risk of fire spread, even though there's non-combustible concrete separating the two. If this building went up due to the lumber or anything else in here, it can still spread to that building in any of three ways. Embers could fly across land in the gutters or the other material around there and cause that building to ignite. The radiant heat from this building could be enough to ignite that one as well. Or you could have direct flame from the fence line behind me. That can be mitigated as easily as just opening that gate.
Replacing the wooden gate with a metal one is another option. The roofing materials is another important consideration, and especially on priority structures, should be changed to metal, plate tile, or asphalt roofing. These are just a couple of ways you can mitigate the risk of fire spreading through direct flame or radiant heat. Remember, define your priority areas and focus on those first, and then strategize how to create a 10-meter defensible space and then a 30-meter defensible space by reducing ember traps and removing pathways for radiant heat and direct flames. To help with this process, you can use the checklist in the risk reduction section in the guide. This section provides a list of combustible materials to look for and a checklist of actions and strategies. This can be used alongside a copy of your operations map, which you may find helpful for guiding your mitigation priorities. For more information about making this map, watch the Creating an Operations Map video. For more resources to help in learning about wildfire risk and mitigation, visit www.firesmartbc.ca. But fire mitigation is only one of many essential parts of preparing for wildfire. To learn more about what you can do and to download the complete guide and workbook, visit www.climateagriculturebc.ca/wildfire.
Okay, so yeah, that's I mean, we'll put together a video for sure, but it kind of ties everything together with the FireSmart program. So yeah. Thank you for allowing me to speak on this, and yeah, hopefully there's some questions.
Thanks so much, Ken. That was great. If anybody has any questions, please pop them in the chat. And we will absolutely get Ken to answer those questions. Maybe I'll start because I do have a question. A lot of us, communicate to producers or maybe communicate to folks that are working with producers directly. So based on your experience, what is the most impactful first FireSmart action that we could communicate to farmers that they could take that is with limited time resources that they could put into place right now during winter, before fire season happens? Like what could we communicate to them that they could do immediately?
Yeah, so the biggest thing is just that that 1.5 6 meter space around their structures, their priority structures that they're looking to for sure protect. That space is probably the most influential on any kind of potential for fire. So, and it's the biggest thing is it's not a very expensive thing to do. Like it's just going around, I mean, cleaning up grass, getting some kind of a space from the ground level up. If you do have wooden siding, whatever they can do to make like a 15 centimeter, half a foot or a foot barrier between the grass and any kind of flammable structure. So yeah, the biggest thing that they can do is that area around any building, hose off holes so the embers can't get in. Again, fairly inexpensive way to protect a building.
Very good. That's excellent advice. We have a question from Emily. What has been an effective strategy to educate farmers and get the word out about FireSmart?
Well, this is definitely a very good strategy. These kind of forums, and I haven't spoken to. I think I see the folks from Nova Scotia on here. We've spoken to them about it, getting the word out through these organizations, getting in contact with the local representative from the provinces or territories on FireSmart. There's a lot of events that do go on for FireSmart. Specifically speaking for Nova Scotia, there's the Emergency Preparedness Week, basically events all over the province to, kind of promote and show folks that what we can do in emergency situations and how to mitigate that. I'm sure I know all through the provinces anyway, they have kind of the same process where they have emergency preparedness weeks, days, getting the FireSmart representatives to come out and do talks on farms, have assessments done. There's all kinds of ways to get the word out if it's not just individually, but as a group. One thing would be municipalities, towns, putting the word out, kind of what you guys had, and then it could just be another forum similar to this, or an in-person presentation on site.
Perfect. And maybe Ken, is there anything that maybe we could share with our participants here today? Maybe you and I can have a conversation after about maybe some resources or links or things that we potentially could send out to help these folks get the word out to producers,
Yep,
to help, mitigate any loss that we might see from fire. So if
absolutely.
maybe you and I can maybe take this offline and have that conversation and get some of that information out to folks.
Yep,
Oh,
for
we
sure.
have a question from Mel, and I think this kind of goes back to that I'm so sorry, urban wildfire interface. Is that what you called it, right?
The wildfire urban interface. Yes.
Well, yeah, yeah. I think that was a real issue in Fort McMurray, right? When
Yes.
that 2016 fire happened. I read this great book, Fire Weather by John Valuta, and they really talked about that. So that was really interesting for me. But Mel mentions here, what about urban stables that are warehouse style with 3,000 pounds of hay sitting in the loft above animals? What's a hazard there? What does that look like? How does that impact, the safety around fire, in those kind of situations?
So if the building that does house all of the hay plus the livestock in it at the same place, hopefully it's, if it's a wooden structure, you definitely want to separate any flammable materials as far away from it as you can. Metal roof, those kind of stuff, close up all of the holes or potential um, ember entries into the building so that hay loft does not become something that will eventually catch on fire. If we'll say perfect scenario, if that, if it's close to standing timber, any kind of wildland fuel, um, hopefully it can be removed. If not, there's aside from the materials that the building is built out of and closing off any potential for fire to get inside, um, the biggest thing would be to try to separate uh, fuels, have it more open, and then the good thing is those kind of locations, if there's no potential for that building to be impacted by fire, it's probably one of the potentially hopefully a safer place for the livestock that are in there also. So yeah, and aside from the materials and proximity to wildland fuel or fuel sources, that's the biggest thing is the proximity. Try to avoid, the whole 10-meter thing is probably one of the best options for a building like that is to expand out past 10 meters of no fuel or no potential for ignition close by.
No, that's great. We do have a question here from Kylie. Are there any resources, checklists, platforms, or mediums of communications, best practices that relates to moving large heads of animals during an evacuation that you know of?
Hmm. I think that really depends on where you're from. I know from my time out west, there was a fair bit of that done. So there has been some you know, literature we'll say done on how you can, resources available basically on how you can get you know, if we're talking, I'm just going to say 100 head, you need a lot of transportation for that. So there's ability to get the if it's other farmers, if it's SPCA, if it's other organizations that could potentially deal with livestock, bringing in that infrastructure of trailers and whatnot to move. Um, you know, again, majority of that stuff would be from, we'll say, more fire-prone provinces. SPCAs, those kind of other organizations would probably be a very good contact for that. That's it. As far as literature, there's probably something in there that would be, best practices, I would say.
Well, that's great. Rebecca mentions that Food and Farm Care Ontario does have some information on this.
Right.
Yeah, perfect. And we will also try to find some of that information as well. And we will try to do a follow-up email with some of this, with some of this information. Trevor has a question. Do you have any advice for producers with temporary foreign workers during evacuation? He follows this up with there was an issue in British Columbia during wildfire in the Caribou region several years ago.
Okay. Um, I guess
Maybe,
in what way?
yeah,
Uh,
Trevor, could you just maybe follow up with that? Is it a language issue or is it a culture issue? I guess I don't think the question's quite 100% clear. If you wouldn't mind just typing in a little bit of a follow-up there, that'd be great. Um, and while we're waiting for Trevor, I do have another question. Are there any fire smart recommendations that are often overlooked on farms compared to like residential urban properties?
Yeah, yes, I'll say. I mean, the biggest thing is like the video that we just seen there was like a real life scenario. So it was someone's farm that they just went on and they were looking around to see these issues. Fences are one thing. I wouldn't necessarily think of a fence as a fire wick or a fire trap that could potentially bring active fire to a building. It's those kind of things that might get overlooked that on the corner of a building that has a fence. Now you got, you know, we can't get to it with the mower. Now you got a big tuft of grass that's kind of growing next to it. Those are the traps that really cause issues to buildings that are just, everything might be nice and mowed, clean, nice and flat, no hazard, but one little spot like that could potentially hold embers, can get overlooked very, very easily.
Yeah, for sure. That makes good sense. Oh, Trevor followed up, making sure there's a translator with each group bus having the appropriate contact number for the consular office. So I think,
Okay.
yeah. So that's
Yeah.
where he was going with that.
Okay. That's what kind of was leaning that way as far as like what do you do with those folks after the evacuation's been sent out and now they're evacuated from the farm site? Um, yeah, that's as far as that goes, like the other municipality, because it was in BC and in Caribou, any of those, we'll say, um, kind of temporary sites set up to receive evacuees. I'm sure they would be more than welcome to go to those. I can't really think of kind of dealing with them any different than somebody else in an evacuation.
Would it be appropriate to encourage producers that do have temporary foreign workers on their farms to make sure that they do include inclusivity in terms of language, culture, consular contacts in their emergency preparedness plans, including fire
Yeah,
safety?
yeah, like that fire plan. If emergency agencies knew that there's 15 temporary foreign workers, language is definitely a barrier. If they knew that that was the case coming in to assist as emergency services, they would be able to deal with that fairly quickly.
For sure. So when maybe we could maybe talk a little bit more about emergency plans and emergency preparedness. How do you recommend that farms integrate, fire smart principles within those emergency preparedness or farm safety plans?
One of the biggest things would be, again, contacting the local representative for the province and getting an assessment done. The assessments will kind of include work with a fire plan. So the assessment basically goes through the property and looks at potential areas where fire could be a concern and then gives recommendations to what they can do to mitigate wildfire. So yeah, setting that up, each province and territory again does these assessments. It's just more or less getting a hold of through the FireSmart website, getting hold of the liaison for the province and setting up the assessment. And then a document is given to the landowner, property owner, and now they can use this as a plan or use this to develop a wildfire mitigation plan for their property.
Gotcha. Farms across the country are pretty different, right? I'm sitting here in Saskatchewan. It's an incredibly cold day, but southern Saskatchewan, there's not a lot of trees, and there's less trees all the time. It feels like they're pulling out to the fire, the wind breaks all the time, and then they've got these farms in British Columbia and Nova Scotia and New Brunswick that are or Quebec. A lot of times they're very treed in. They're very close to a lot of fuel like that. Um, have you seen a lot of difference between how FireSmart principles are approached province to province based on just geography and natural landscapes?
Yeah, like for sure, each province is different. The timber typing is one of the biggest things. Eastern Canada, I'll say fortunately has a lot of Acadian forest, so it's a more of a hardwood dominant type. Whereas out west, especially in the northern latitudes of the provinces, boreal forest, conifer dominated stands. So any structures that are within those conifer dominated stands are now definitely higher risk than other areas of the province that would be more open. Like I said, Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC to a point, and Manitoba will say like huge tracts of land that are considered the farms are hundreds of hectares, and we could look into the ranch side of it too, right, where they're big, big, big tracts of land. That it's a lot to maintain. It can be a lot if you're looking at FireSmart for some of those bigger operations. Focusing in on the buildings themselves is probably the biggest option. But fuel typing is probably one of the biggest differences between all the provinces.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, I remember when we were kids, well, still, my folks are still on the farm. They have a fire break. They maintain it's cultivated around the farmyard proper.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of what they do to help mitigate that problem with those, prairie fires that just blow right across all the highways and, go
Yeah.
just kind of burn down half the countryside. So
Yeah,
it's pretty interesting.
there's lots of other options too, right? Like, if you do decide to go on a fire break way, like have some kind of barrier, um, you know, you would decide where you'd like to have it. But there was stuff that we kind of worked with in northern Alberta where any fire guards that were put in place, they're fenced, and now they're considered to be you graze them. You have to get goats or you get some kind of other livestock that now graze these guards to keep them clean, because maintenance is one of the biggest things for main or fire guards is you can you can clean it out, you can make it nice and fire mitigated so fire won't pass through it. But if you don't maintain it every year, they can get um, fairly expensive to maintain. And if it's 2 or 3 years after you build it, the chance for fire to get through that guard is very good.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, Ken, I wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time today and presenting to us. We really appreciate it. Lots to think about as we, transition out of winter into spring. And of course, seeing last year was a terrible fire season for many places in the country, and in the world, honestly. So, it's becoming a real reality, every year that we are going to have to, face these fires, and how do we do that the best we can with what we've got.
Right.
And this information is very helpful, I think. And if we can get that, if all of us can work to get that word out there to producers and landowners, how to potentially save their property, save livestock, and save the folks that work on these properties, I think that this has been very well worth it. So I appreciate your time, and I appreciate everything you're doing. Your work is important, and we thank you so much. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today. This is our first of our 2026 forums. We will be doing more forums soon, especially for in a celebration of Canadian Agricultural Safety Week, which is coming up in March. So we, urge you to keep an eye on your inbox and check out our website. Our ribbons are up for grabs right away. So if you'd like to order Canadian Agricultural Safety Week ribbons to wear and talk about farm safety, they're for free. Please do that on our website. And of course, if you have any forums that you'd like to hear from CASA, we'd be happy to have those suggestions. So you can let us know through our website or info@casaaxa.ca. And we're very happy that you were here today. So thank you so much. Take care, and I hope that everyone continues to be fire smart. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.